melt this when I'm ocean waves.
Today on Never Legends podcast, I have Matthew Hatfield from Virginia Preps, ESPN Radio. Matthew is the king of Virginia State high school sports. Keeps us up to date on what's going on. Does great work. It gets the prospects and the coaches lots of great exposure. Matthew, thanks for joining me.
Always a pleasure, Julian. Good to chat with you here as September comes to a close. We get ready for October, and then the leaves start, falling, and things changing, colors getting cooler. It's that time of year where we go from fall to winter to the overlap. So it's a hectic but fun time of year.
It is, and for a guy like you, you've got a chance to see some of the teams, and you made some really good predictions. I mean, I listened to our talk from the beginning of the season. You have not been off at all. So, but before we get to what's going on and an update on the season, I want to talk to you a little bit about the realignment. It seems like it's never great news for me because all I want to see is three high school champions in basketball. That's not happening, but I didn't see there were some changes in Prince William County, particularly. What are some of the changes, and what are your thoughts?
Well, first off, you're not alone in that sentiment. A lot of people have echoed those to me. They would like to go back to the old AAA, AA, single A days. Why don't we? And my simple reason is you have the state growing so large, and especially at an exponential level up in the Northern Virginia area around Loudoun and so forth. It's just not feasible for them to do, even though I personally would think a 4 classification format would be better than 6 if they could pull it off. I don't know how you get it to work logistically. They're kind of caught in a rock and a hard place if you do sell everything. But as far as what jumps out at me, I think the first thing that jumps out, at least, it might not be so much for folks in the Northern Virginia or Western part of the state, but the fact that Highland Springs is now in the same region, Region 6A, as Oscar Smith, because those are 2 football factory heavyweights, if you will, powers for many years. They're both in Region 6A. And then when you throw in the fact that you also still have Thomasdale and Manchester, 2 other Richmond schools that have won state championships in the last couple of decades, that becomes a very fierce region. The one thing that I do notice, Julian, and maybe you do too, looking at some of the numbers that were released with this final adopted plan, is that you still have a disparity in some of the regional sizes. And I don't know how they go about fixing that. For example, like 6B is 19 schools. 6A is 11 schools. They're playing for the same state championship. Doesn't seem like it's the most evenly, formed situation. You go to Class 4, there's 17 in 4B, only 9 in 4A. So it's arguably easier to get out of a 4A than a 4B because of the sizes of those regions. And you go down the line to 3, 2, and 1. Although in Classes 2 and Class 1, it seems like they're a little bit more equally distributed as far as the number of schools in the region, and a couple others that got shifted. I think Sharando in 4D is interesting to me. William Fleming being in 5C, and then Patrick Henry Roanoke. They've been all over the place as far as their movements of regions. They're also in 5C now with those Richmond area schools. Louisa shifts back from a 4D up a division to 5C. So it's hard for a lot of people to keep track of. The thing is, I will look at the positives that you're going to have some new rivalries come playoff time in various sports, be it fall, winter, spring sports that are formed, and some different matchups we haven't had before. In addition to, like I mentioned, the Highland Springs and Oscar Smith, potentially, you'll have some others that form in the next few years that will develop and I think get some fan interest.
Yeah, well, that sounds about right. Hopefully it'll work itself out and we can get some stability. But I guess different areas of the state are going to grow faster than others, and it's always going to be some tinkering. Before we get to this year's players and teams, how have last year's players who are playing in college done? Any of them made big splashes on the collegiate level? I know Old Dominion's playing well. Any of those players, Virginia players, and what about the rest of the state and also the country?
Yeah, it's funny. I think as of a week or 2 ago, you may still be Ollie Jennings, who played at Highland Springs High School, actually started out at Hermitage, now at Old Dominion, transferred from West Virginia, was leading the nation in receiving yards at one point. That was after a couple of games, and ODU had that big upset of Virginia Tech, if we can call it an upset now. I know the Hokies have had some struggles, not to make my Virginia Tech friends out there upset. And speaking of Virginia Tech, they lost a stud receiver from Frank W. Cox High School in Virginia Beach, and Tavion Robinson, who was a multi-sport star, made his mark on the gridiron, also had a game-winning basket at the Norfolk Scope in the regional basketball tournament for his team when they won a championship at the regional level. He left Virginia Tech for Kentucky, and he had close to, I think it was 170 yards receiving in Kentucky's latest win over the weekend. They got a big showdown coming up with Ole Miss in the SEC. So there's a couple of them there. And every time you turn on the TV, whether it be at the college or NFL level, you'll see someone from Virginia, regardless of the area code. If it's 757, 703, 804, 540, you name it, whether it be from Fredericksburg, Richmond, Tidewater, Northern Virginia, Roanoke, somebody from our state and Commonwealth is making a big play on a Saturday afternoon or a Saturday night or a Sunday NFL game that you see. This guy from whatever, just the other day I was watching on special teams. I didn't even realize he was in the league. Bobby Price, who played at Catholic High in Virginia Beach. Didn't even realize he was in the state. He was playing in the NFL, I should say, from our state. I knew he was in training camps and so forth. But every time you turn on TV, you're bound to see at least one, maybe two or three players from the state who hail from Virginia.
Oh, that's great to see that. When we talked last month, you said there wasn't the 5-star prospects this year that we've had in the past. Have any surprised you? Have any moved up, a la Jamie Kaiser in basketball to that kind of status?
There's one that's really starting to bubble up, and he's a young man at Churchland High School in Portsmouth named Brandon Hillman. In fact, Notre Dame came to see him play this past Friday, and he's a dual threat quarterback. Now, he's not being recruited by everyone at quarterback. There are some schools that are dabbling, looking at him like at QB, such as Norfolk State and Howard. He just picked up an offer in the last 24, 48 hours from Virginia Tech, and this is his first year playing defensive back, in addition to his dual threat skills at QB, rushing and passing for Churchland. He was the Region 4A Offensive Player of the Year. He's bust out and been a real big story. Elliott Mean, the running back at Lake Braddock, Elliott's had a great start to the year. I think he just picked up his first offer from New Hampshire, and everybody knows about Daniel Lipovsky, the quarterback for Lake Braddock. Coach Doherty's got a terrific offense. They've had a great offense even well before Coach Doherty got there. When they had back in the days of Jim Poitras, they throw the ball around with Michael Niebrick and some players, and the QBs. They've had Billy Edwards, by the way, who came in from Maryland the other day in relief in a big game with them in Michigan. So they've had some decorated QBs in passing games, but Mean's a really good running back who's getting some attention. He's bubbling up. There's a junior that just came back to our state, Julian, by the name of Keontae Arrington. He's an offensive tackle I watched this past Friday night at the Lake Taylor Maury game for Lake Taylor, which lost a tough game with Maury. It was a good game for 3 quarters. Maury pulled away late, but I'm taking pictures in pregame warmups, and I look over, line of scrimmage. Guys are warming up. This kid is just enormous. I'm like, where did he come from? He's about 6'7", 6'8", 325. He's got Power 5 written all over him. He was originally at Maury, went to IMG Academy, and now has come back home to play for Lake Taylor. And Hank Sawyer says the Power 5 is going to be drilling over him. And after watching him for a drive just maul his defender down the field, as they had like an 18-play, 12-play, whatever it was, 15-play drive with about 60, 70 yards rushing on it to score, I can see why. He's just a massive human being, and he's got, he's going to get better punch and footwork and little technical things in his game in the next year plus there at Lake Taylor and going to some camps and places. But he's got a chance to be a big-time recruit. And already on his team is one in Elijah Washington. They nicknamed him Moss. He's a 6'8" receiver that we've talked about, plays basketball as well, and he's got a bunch of Power 5s looking at him. So the ones that kind of jump to mind, though, Brandon Hillman at Churchland, Mean at Lake Braddock. There's a couple others that are bubbling up here that I think will as we get closer to the playoffs, start to make their mark and establish themselves. One in particular at Essex High School. It's a small Class 1 school. Our guy Will Garlick just covered them in a recent win over King and Queen. Now, King and Queen was 4-0, had 4 shutouts, and their quarterback, Malik Holmes, who's very under-recruited, dazzling numbers. I think we may have spoken in the preseason about his 6,000 yards, 72 touchdowns thereabout in his career. He came in as kind of the main attraction, along with Harris's teammate, Cam Robinson, a linebacker committed to UVA, and Harris stole the show with 6 rushing touchdowns in that showdown between teams. We had ranked number 2 and number 3 in the state in Class 1. So he's kind of vaulted himself into the state player of the year conversation. If you, regardless of if you're playing Class 6 ball or Class 1, if you become a state player of the year type of performer, or even on a team that wins a state championship, you get a lot of attention. And I throw one more name out there. Oscar Smith is known as a ballyhooed football program. We talked about them a little bit earlier. They've had a quarterback, kind of a competition between Parker Lancaster, Cade Cox. Cade Cox, a newcomer from Greenbrier Christian. Interestingly enough, he's working out on Sunday mornings with Bobby Wilder, the former ODU football coach. Mm-hmm. And I think as he's developing his game, coming over from Greenbrier Christian, he's becoming more and more accustomed to the 11-man football, because they played 8-man football at Greenbrier, and he's putting up some great numbers. The other day in their game against Hickory, who's not exactly one of the better teams in the Southeastern District, first 9 plays, he had 4 touchdown passes, 1 touchdown run. And if you played Oscar Smith, you're going to get exposure. You're going to play in a lot of big games. They got one coming up with Indian River. They got Kings Fork and Western Branch, 2 heavyweights in October. So if Oscar Smith goes on this journey like they've done many times before, he certainly could put himself in the conversation of getting some schools showing some more attention. I know VMI has offered him thus far. They want him bad. New Hampshire is in the picture, and there's some Power 5 sniffing around like Pittsburgh and Maryland. Plus Marshall could be offering before his senior season's over. So another name to keep under the hat there from the Tidewater area.
Also, did you mention Tony Rojas? Is he still on some on the list of some big team names?
Well, he's
big name teams.
Yeah, Tony's actually joined committed to Penn State. He made a commitment. Yeah, and Penn State has done great in our state here this year. Matter of fact, you put on their games. They've got Keandre Lambert from Maury making plays. They've had a number of players from the 757 and beyond, but they got a lineman from our area who might be, or not from our area, from our state, who might be the best kept secret up at Light Ridge High School, relatively new school. Anthony Donka. He probably is one of the best linemen, hidden gems that Penn State was able to come in our state and nab. Certainly, people look at Alex Birchmeyer at Broad Run, who had the measurables, the size, the length, the wrestling background, and he was the main highlighted marquee ranked recruit. He's very, very good. Donka coming at a school like Light Ridge that really hadn't produced players before because they haven't been around more than 2-3 years. I think he went to a camp and he opened some eyes there. He's definitely a big time talent that people need to watch out for. And they're off to like a 3-1 start. And Rojas, to your point, he's been tearing it up. He's had some 200, 300-yard games. He's been just fantastic. And he does it both sides of the ball, running back, linebacker, and he's not too shabby on the hardwood either.
Yeah, exactly. I like his basketball game a lot. Well, one thing I've noticed, Matthew, is there's been a lot of blowouts. It seems like it's the have and the have-nots. It's almost like you're looking at girls varsity or girls JV basketball games when the scores are 62-5. I mean, in Prince William County, I'm seeing a lot of blowouts. What is it? What's causing such an imbalance with all these games this year?
I actually asked this question to my radio co-host, Coach Ed Young, on the basketball side from Nan's River a couple weeks ago, because on our show, I had dropped a stat. I'm trying to dig it up here as we chat here, Julian. I think I've got it for you in just a second. We had an amazing disparity. This is just a Tidewater thing. You're absolutely right. This is happening in Northern Virginia. You see Centerville put up 81 in a game. You're seeing Freedom and I saw Freedom in person. We'll probably talk about them a little bit. Freedom is the real deal. They're just phenomenal. They're whacking people by 50, 60, 70-point margins, and it definitely is a have-not. So there was 30 games a couple weekends ago in Tidewater. Of the 30 games, 23 were decided by 20 or more points. Only 3 games were decided by 1 possession that weekend, with Menchville, Hampton, King William, Caroline, and Colonial Heights, Southampton, which was 24-0 before the game suddenly became close and actually went to overtime, where Colonial Heights was able to hold them off. So I think it's a couple of factors to answer your question. One, I do think the coaching turnover matters. I think you're seeing a lot of schools where there are established veteran coaches, staffs have been together for 6 to 8 to 10 to 12 years. And then you have new coaches get hired late in the summer. It could be June, July, and they haven't really gotten in their whole system and what they want to do. I think the transfer bug has affected it to a degree. And there's always been transfers. The alarming rate of them is increasing for a variety of reasons in sports, whether we're talking about football, basketball, you name it. So the player movement and the continuity that's not established at some places, or you lose a key player or two in your school with low numbers, particularly in a sport like football where numbers matter so much. It does a lot to you. And even in basketball, it's 5-on-5, you lose your 2 best studs, they transfer to a public or a private school, wherever it is, it's going to matter. Because in football, you can replace it easier sometimes because it's 11 minutes opposed to 5. You're seeing that disparity. I think that's part of it. And then, year round, some of these schools that are known as your powerhouses across the board, we're talking about the Stonebridges, the South Counties, the Oscar Smiths, the Highland Springses, the Varinas, the Salems, the Lake Taylors, you go on and so forth. They've got a culture and a foundation and things in place. And these schools that have low numbers or haven't had winning, or they've had 3 or 4 or 5 coaches in about a 6-7 year period, there's just not that desire to get out there and change things and participate in, whether it be a 7-on-7 event, a fall league, a summer league, a camp, those type of things. And that's where you're seeing that gap grow. It doesn't grow. What we're seeing on Friday nights, I always hear from coaches, and I'm sure you do too, it's the preparation that's been put in practice from Monday to Thursday. Well, really, it's the off-season conditioning and things that have gone on from January to now here in September, where that gap has grown from, because you didn't just become 70 points better in 4 or 5 days. That's the game plan. That's the blueprint. That happened from January to February to March and on forward with all of things with the weight room, strength and conditioning, plays, and that's where we're seeing it. And I don't know how we fix it. I think one thing that the VHSL and people need to look at is, and we're seeing this with some smaller schools, I know they're big about playing a district schedule, but let's be perfectly honest. If a school that we know is going to get whacked by 50, 60 points, and they're in the same district as another school is going to possibly whack them by 50, 60 points, let those two schools schedule somebody else that's a more competitive game for both parties. Because when you're a kid and you've been in a program for 3-4 years and we have these losing streaks of 30, 40, 50 games, the kids don't want to go out anymore. Give them a chance to win and compete against somebody of similar ilk. That's what we need to do. And forget about, well, you have to play a mandatory 8-game. Forget all that. Put games that are more interesting to the fans on the field, regardless of where you're from and what district and what region. Just take away some of those parameters to where we don't see as many of those and we get more equal matchups.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they can fix that, because every time I pick up I pick up the paper, but also I look online, the scores are just getting more and more lopsided. And it's going to keep folks from coming to games if that continues.
It's not going to change unless they do something like that, Julian, though, because again, you know when you see the matchups, you say, that's a game I want to see. And sometimes those games do become blowouts, but when you know it's going to be something like that, and you have running clocks and teams are beating people by 70, 80 points, it's a problem. Now you've got a scenario where it's happening, and I know it's happening in various parts of the state, where there are teams that are, I'm not going to say somebody hid behind COVID, because COVID's a very serious thing, and we don't take that as any laughing, joking matter. But now there's situations where teams are canceling games and just taking a forfeit, and that doesn't help anybody because these kids want to play. But again, let them schedule outside. I know you have to play certain teams in your district, but let them have a little more flexibility with the schedules.
Yeah, and maybe even be creative in how you create the districts in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get to the teams and the season, how it's going so far. Why don't we start with Class 6? Obviously, Oscar Smith is the team to beat, but I mean the Prince William County teams are making a lot of noise. We've had some competitive games up in Fairfax County in Northern Virginia. My kids' high school, Yorktown, had a tough overtime loss to Centerville, but there's some teams that are playing very well. And obviously there's going to be some teams in Richmond that we're going to hear about. So what's your first half of the season analysis of Class 6?
Yeah, Yorktown's had a couple of great games. I mean, there's been some battles, them, and you got, like you said, those Concord teams that are Centerville's, the Westfields, obviously Robinson's had a great start at 5-0. Don't want to forget about them. Patriot and Fairfax have been good. I'm going to make the Oscar Smith folks a little upset here. They're great. They're 2-time defending state champs. I got them ranked number 1 for a reason, because they're great and they can win it again. But I've seen Freedom live, and I'm going to see Oscar Smith this weekend live. So maybe if you talk to me next week or in a few weeks or a month from now, I'll change my opinion. But from what I've seen in person, I don't think I've seen a better team than Freedom. And maybe this is in a couple years. Now, Highland Springs, who we'll get to in Class 5, is right there. That would be one heck of a ball game. But from what I've seen here, and this is like the NFL, Julian, after week 3, people are putting teams in the Super Bowl, the college football playoff, they're putting teams in there. As of, the last weekend of September here, Freedom's playing at a higher clip than anybody, and that's including the great Oscar Smith program. Jeff Overton is sensational at running back. He's going to be a big-time prospect. His uncle's obviously the coach there, and Daryl Overton. His dad was a state championship QB at C.D. Hilton. Their line play when I saw them live against Stonebridge is what impressed me, because I wondered about how they could do. But Anthony Crispin and those boys up front were really working well against a very, very, very strong, fundamental, tough Stonebridge team. And their skill weapons are just tremendous, from Juju Preston on down to, I mentioned Overton. Elijah Reed's a breakout kid this year for them, and their defense hits you hard. It hits you in the mouth at linebacker, and they've got a complete group. I think this is possibly going to be Freedom's year. Now, in their region, they're going to get some tests potentially, we think, with Battlefield, who's mighty strong, and they're no slouch defensively. And Patriots offense can hum real quickly with Fernandez and Bigby and that crew slinging the ball around. But Freedom's playing at a different level right now. Western Branch stubbed its toe this past week against Kings Fork. Thomas Dale survived the scare in Richmond against Matulka. And keep an eye out for Lake Braddock. They're going to have that showdown with South County end of the year. Now, the South County quarterback got hurt in that loss to Westfield, Jordan Dennis. Or I should say he was hurt going into that game. He played the second half, gutted it out, made things closer. I would not count South County out just yet. They got a lot of underclassmen on this roster. I do think Lake Braddock's playing better than anybody in that region right now, Occoquan Region 6C. And 6D could be a little bit more wide open, although, like we said back in the preseason, when you got Isaiah Ragland, who's a workhorse, 2,000-yard back, that matters a lot for Centerville. So I think that they would be the team you would look at first, even though they could get beaten, and they've played in some close games here. So Class 6, we're looking at that potential collision for state semifinal Saturday with Oscar Smith and Freedom. The question now is, can anybody emerge to take them down a peg or keep us from having that matchup? Because we've had some potential state semifinal showdowns we've looked forward to across the board, be it in Class 6, Class 5, Class 4, Class 3. That didn't happen. This one feels like it's inevitable, though.
Yeah. Well, let's go to Class 6. Stonebridge has had some tough games this year. It hasn't been an easy game for them. You predicted they're going to have that their graduations are going to have some effect, and they've had. They got a great coach, obviously. Is Stonebridge still in it? One of your picks, and I know Richmond team. Is it Verina in 5?
Highland Springs.
Highland Springs. That's right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Highland Springs in 5. So what are you thinking about Division 5?
Well, on Stonebridge, real quick, got a chance to catch up with Mickey Thompson pregame. They're still ironing out some kinks with some things, kind of getting that quarterback position. You lose Jacob Thomas, who was the all everything for them last year, now at James Madison. They've dabbled with Zeke Wimbush, their stud receiver, who's going to Charlotte at some quarterback at times. They moved Colin Hinton to the backfield more as a receiver, getting some sweeps. They're still running the ball very, very well. They had a game with Colonial Forge recently, Julian, where they ran the ball for like 400 yards, controlled the clock, but had like 5 or 6 fumbles. So they've had some ball security issues. They've had some injuries. One of their key linemen, two-way standout, is out for the year, which is going to affect them. Although if anybody's got depth, it's Stonebridge, that's for sure, because they always kind of seem to produce 70, 80 players on a roster every year. So they can overcome those things and survive it. And they've played a very, very rugged schedule. The same thing is true for Highland Springs. Highland Springs' schedule has been no cupcake. They've gone out of state to play number 1 ranked teams in the state of West Virginia and in North Carolina, and they beat both of them. They absolutely blew out Martinsburg in a game I watched online, and our reporter Byron Jones was there to cover for us on Virginia Preps. And they took down Chambers of North Carolina, which used to be Vance High School, who had won a state championship before, like Martinsburg. And that was a close ball game. They lost to him close last year. They lost to Martinsburg last year as well. And their quarterback, Christian Martin, right now is playing on a different level. I actually got a call from someone the other night, one of my coaching friends, and they said, who is the state player of the year or first team all-state quarterback? Because Christian Martin looks like it if Highland Springs does win the state championship, which is my pick right now. There's a young man at Green Run by the name of Kevin White Jr. who came into Green Run from Menchville, and he is putting up some eye-popping numbers through the air for the reigning Region 5A champion Stallions, who have maybe as dynamic a receiving core as there is in the state with Keelan Brody Adams, Tayshawn Young, Steve, Jaden Anderson, and others. Green Run's a very high-flying, fast, speedy team with a lot of skill at the receiver and talent positions, running backs, receivers. They got a couple of tests possibly, but I think they're going to be smooth sailing on to the regional championship, where Kempsville could be their collision course there. And Maury, despite losing a close game to New Bern out of North Carolina, they're having to overcome the injury to their all-state linebacker, Nathaniel Booga Knox, who got dinged up in the preseason against Kings Fork. Doesn't look like he'll come back. So their defense has had to mix and match a little bit. I do think Maury will ultimately be one of the Final Four teams when it's all said and done in Class 5. So I think we have the heavyweights that are pretty established as far as Highland Springs, Stonebridge, Green Run, and Maury, however you want to order them 1 through 4. If there's a team or two outside of that mixture to watch out for that could upset the apple cart, Kempsville, as I mentioned in 5A, because they played Green Run close, a couple of times here last year in the playoffs, this year to begin the season. And then in 5D, I'd watch out for Independence, because that's a relatively new school. RJ Windows, the coach there, who used to be with Mickey Thompson on staff. They produced some players on the next level for colleges in recent years here. Brian Courtney, who's done at Florida State. On this team currently, they have an offensive lineman, Luke Rogers, who's committed to Air Force. They've been beating some people. Now, the competition is going to get tougher for them. And end of the year, they take on Stonebridge. So if they can make that a close game, possibly even win it, that is as good a springboard as you can have going into the 5D playoffs, where there's a lot of good teams beyond just even Stonebridge, because you look at Massaponax, who's a known program. You look at Mountain View, who's undefeated with a running back going to Syracuse, and Ike Daniels. So there's some other teams out there that may at least be able to play Stonebridge competitively, which we've not seen here in recent years at the regional level.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like there's some parity between Class 5 and Class 6. Sounds like there's both great teams on both levels. Well, let's go to Class 4. I would imagine it is Verina, I believe, was state champ last year.
Correct.
But you mentioned earlier Kings Fork had a big win, and I believe they're Class 4. So what do you see in Class 4 so far?
I'm curious to see a couple things, Julian. Number one, the great defenses, because we're talking about all these offenses that are high powered, like Oscar Smith and Freedom and Highland Springs and Green Run. Verina and Kings Fork have good offenses, but their defenses are playing at a tremendous level. And they met in the state semis last year with Verina winning. Kavion Keys, the stud linebacker for Verina, who's also a big time receiver for the Blue Devils. He's committed to North Carolina. Kings Fork had to replace its best defensive players with Kyrie Moist, who's at Virginia Tech, Tavius Higgs, and Bravion Campbell. But it's been a really collective effort for Anthony Joffrion's team in getting to 4-0 here with just one first half touchdown allowed the entire year. And they played Indian River and Western Branch, two good teams. So you have those two excellent defenses. And then there's Dinwiddie out there who can really score with some of the best of them out there. And they've had a couple 50, 60-point outbursts this year. And they moved their quarterback, or their running back, I should say, from last year, who was a freshman, to quarterback. And they've not missed a beat. Billy Mills has got a program and a system there that works. Massive offensive tackle in Colin Jackson, who paves the way for them up front. Salem had a loss to Martinsburg early in the year. They've recovered. I think they'll be in the hunt. Louisa is a really interesting team. Now, Louisa's got a quarterback in Landon Wilson who's maybe, if not the best in Class 4, certainly one of them. And then they've got two linemen who are big time, and Quentin Spellman, who just committed to Towson recently, and Elijah Brooks, who committed to VMI. And up front, if they can hang with the best teams around like Salem, and they get past them to win the region, Louisa could be a team we're talking about. They've been to a state championship and knocked on that door a couple of times. The surprise teams to me are two of them, actually three. Tuscarora, because they had that coaching change from Coach Wheelbarger to Coach Toller right before the season, and they just survived a close game with Briar Woods and their former coach, and Mike Burnett, who's leading the way for the Falcons, who are resurgent. They're unbeaten right now, and I want to see how far they can get. 4C is the wide open region of the four regions, and A, B, and D, because I think we feel like A is going to probably be Kings Fork. B is going to be most likely either Verina or Dinwiddie. D looks like it's Salem with Louisa and Eastie Glass challenging. Then 4C, you've got Tuscarora, you've got Loudoun County, who's a surprising 4-0, and then Kettle Run, which you've not talked a whole lot about, 5-0 up there in Knoxville. They probably get very little coverage and fanfare, and they got a wide receiver by the name of Jordan Tapscott. Tap into him because he is a playmaker. He set some records for single game, career, receptions, yards, touchdowns. He's going to VMI. We're going to probably highlight him in a interview soon on Virginia Preps. He's putting up fantastic numbers, and Kettle Run's a team that could be in one of those Final Four teams standing. I don't know if they have enough of the components to win the whole thing, but they're a team that's kind of bursting on the scene, and Coach Porterfield over there, Charlie Porterfield, has done a good job of building that program. So there's a lot of teams. Four's got a little more depth than people realize, Julian, because even some of the teams outside of our top 10 rankings right now, like Hanover and Warwick and Amherst and Churchland and Patrick Henry Ashland, are good enough to go upset somebody in the first round of the regional semifinals in the playoffs. So 4 could have a little more intrigue as opposed to 5 and 6, where we figure like, all right, we know who the top 4 and 5 are. We know who kind of the top 2 are in 6. You might have a surprise or 2 and 4, even if it's not at the state level, before we get to the regional championship round and Thanksgiving weekend.
Yeah. Well, let's go to Class 3. And last year, Liberty Christian lost to Phoebus in the final. I think both teams, are they on the collision course for a rematch this year?
I think they are now. It's funny. When we did our preseason rankings, we had Phoebus 1, we had Brookville 2. The Bees were stinging people and playing great on offense, led by Drake McDaniel. Their defense with Micah Penix just getting after people. And I had Liberty Christian 3 because there was, even to Coach Rocco's admission, a question about the quarterback position for them, because they really had not thrown the ball all that well, even last year with Davis Lane, who went on to UVA. We knew about their 2 bruising backs in the Davidson brothers. Gideon Davidson, who's a sophomore, attracting offers from all over, including Oregon and Southern Cal. And I think he's on a visit this weekend to Clemson, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, for that big Clemson-NC State showdown. And they had to replace their all-world or all-state linebacker tight end in Dylan Stowers. So going into that game, I picked Liberty Christian to win close against Brookville, and it was not close at all. And it actually made my, raised my eyebrows a little bit that the game was as lopsided as it was, as Liberty Christian beat them 47-7, just absolutely took them apart. And they had a couple of touchdown passes in the first half of that game. So I think they're starting to establish that passing game more to go with the running element, and their defense has been a little bit better than I expected at this point. To answer your question in the short, yes, I think we're on a collision course. However, there are a couple of teams that will try to disrupt that and are capable of disrupting it. Number one, I mentioned Lake Taylor, seeing them against Maury. I know they lost that game, Don't be deceived by that 36-14 final because Lake Taylor outgained Maury in the first half. And Coach Hank Slater's team is a lot better defensively than they were last year, where they had some major coverage breakdowns. Lake Taylor is good enough to hang with Phoebus if they take care of the football. Ball security is going to be big, and I think those two are headed for another showdown. They've had some memorable ones over the years in the playoffs come Thanksgiving weekend in Region 3A. And then the other two teams are not newbies to the scene. Heritage of Lynchburg, who beat Phoebus in a state championship game, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago at Liberty University. Brad Bradley's team has been battle tested. They play in that tough Seminole district with Liberty Christian in Brookville. They played Dinwiddie already. They won their hard-fought rivalry Jug Bowl with EC Glass 12-0, and EC Glass averages about 40 points per game, and their defense shut them down, which nobody else has done. And his teams play a physical, hard-nosed brand of football. He's as intense a coach as there is, Julian. If you ever get a chance on Virginia Preps to look at when we put up some of our ranking stuff, a picture of Bradley, we got a picture where like his veins are popping out, just getting all intense. He gets after it. And one more team, Lord Botetourt. Lord Botetourt made some news this year, history, because they stopped Riverheads from setting the record for consecutive wins by themselves. They now share it with Phoebus. And Botetourt's had a couple close games. They had that one with Riverheads where they prevailed. They also played a team out of state here recently, who I'm forgetting which team it was, and they won that game close. They beat Appomattox, who's won some state championships in Class 2 before. Their quarterback, Jakari Nicely, is the real deal. He ran for 1,800 yards from the quarterback spot as a sophomore, and they've always got big, hulking linemen at Lord Botetourt. They actually beat Princeton of West Virginia 28-27 this past week. So they've played some close games. They've played in big atmospheres. They won't be fazed by the stage come late November, and I think they're going to be the team that comes out of 3D. So, yes, to answer your question, Phoebus and Liberty Christian should be on a collision course for a rematch, but, and I would emphasize, but I would not sell Lake Taylor, Heritage of Lynchburg, or Lord Botetourt short, because if one of those two teams has an injury or two or turnover issues, the other three I just mentioned are capable of knocking them off.
That's great. Well, let's go to Class 2. You predicted King William could be tough. They're a perennial powerhouse in Class 2. How are they doing, and what else are you seeing in the division?
Yeah, King William is 4-1 right now. They had to replace their stud player of the year. I thought could have certainly gotten Gatorade Player of the Year last year, and Damon Claiborne, who I think finished up with the third most touchdowns in a single season in VHSL history. He's down at Wake Forest now. They had one game that they lost close to Essex, who we have as one of the favorites to win Class 1, and it was a game they were winning at halftime, but they just beat Westmoreland High School, which used to be Washington and Lee on the Northern Neck, 28-0. We've got them around 6 or 7 in our top 10. We opened up with Appomattox number 1. So of all of our rankings that we take pride in the accuracy of them, that was the one we dropped the ball on because they're 2 and 3 at the moment. They did have a tough schedule. They played some good teams like Heritage of Lynchburg. They played Lord Botetourt. They played some good quality competition. They still have 2 players to watch out for in Jonathan Penix, who's going to be a big-time weapon before this is all said and done and going to the next level, and Tavorion Copeland, who's committed to Virginia Tech, outside linebacker rover. But right now, the 3 that have kind of separated themselves in my eyes, Julian, are Graham, Ridgeview, and Radford. Graham has got a pedigree. They lost that state championship last year to King William, and their quarterback, Braden Meadows, has moved in nicely to that spot. He played some other positions before, such as wide receiver. He's doing well, and their offensive line has not missed a beat from his brother, Brody, graduating. Ridgeview's got a very exciting offense. If their defense can step up in some of the Mountain 7 district games they've got on deck with Abingdon and Union and others, then I think they have a shot. And Radford's the team that's really opening my eyes. They just beat Christiansburg for the first time in 22 years. Our reporter Rodney Young's got a story on them up on Virginia Preps here recently. And Marcel Baylor, the Virginia Tech commit, has been great. Their quarterback, Landon Clark, recently had a game where he was 10 of 10 in the first half with 5 touchdown passes. So Radford's offense has hit another gear. They've kind of been known as sort of a more grinded out type of team, win some games 21-20, which I think might have been the final of the last game. But they've had some games where they've gotten in the 40s this year and scored at a high clip. So that's what it's going to take to beat maybe a Graham or a Ridgeview, whoever comes out of Region 2D, should Radford get past. And Appomattox has been a stumbling block for them come playoff time in Region 2C. I do think the state champion in Class 2 is going to come out of that bracket of 2C, 2D. I know there's some good teams on the eastern side of the state with Central of Woodstock, who's been doing a really good job, won a big comeback game with Clark County recently, and King William, the defending champ, Thomas Jefferson of Richmond, who's new on the scene, making a lot of noise here with some talented athletes and playmakers. But I think the better teams are on the west side with Graham, Ridgeview, and Radford.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it's going to be a competitive class. So let's go to Class 1. You mentioned the Essex game earlier, and obviously Riverheads was probably the favorite to begin the season. Lost, but they lost to a Class 3 team, so it's not like they lost to a team in their division. So what are you seeing in Class 1? Have things changed at all for you since the beginning of the season?
Well, they're actually changing this week. We're just in our new rankings that we're releasing here in the next, I guess, 10, 12 hours. We're actually vaulting Essex to the one spot ahead of Riverheads, which is going to make lunch not digestible for all of our rabid, loyal, diehard, passionate, great Riverheads fans out there on our message boards. Because, and I wrestled with this, Julian, when they lost to Lord Botetourt. I didn't think they deserved to be, and I'm not dropping them because they did anything wrong. They did lose to Lord Botetourt, but it's mainly because Essex was so impressive and beating King and Queen 48-8. You play a team with a dynamic offensive backfield and guys that have had multiple 200-yard all-purpose games in Malik Holmes and Cam Berry from King and Queen, 4 shutouts, and you beat them 48-8. That opened my eyes as to Essex should not be 2 or 3 in your rankings, which is what they've been all year. They should be number 1. So it's nothing that Riverheads has done wrong. Plus, I'd also add the caveat that Caden Cook-Cash, the bruising running back for Riverheads and reigning state player of the year, had a bit of a shoulder issue in the Botetourt game. I wonder if he's unable to stay 100% healthy. Does Riverheads have enough horses to beat an Essex team right now that's really starting to hit its stride with both Cam Robinson, the UVA commit, and Dorian Harris, the running back, who's had the 6-touchdown game. Plus, their passing game's not too shabby, and their defense has shown it is good enough to contain a very electric offense like King and Queens. There's a couple surprises, though, beyond them. Central Lunenburg is 5-0. They just beat Randolph Henry. I don't think they're probably state championship worthy, but they're a nice story. So is Grayson County, who's 4-0 right now. Rye Cove, Julian, they had like a losing streak of double-digit games coming into this year, and they're 5-0. So that's awesome. A neat story. So there's a lot of neat small school stories, out there that come playoff time we can highlight, and the fans should check out and see what these teams are all about. When it's all said and done, there's a major separation gap, maybe bigger than even the other divisions, between what I would deem as the main 3 favorites at this point. In Riverheads, the reigning 6-time state champs, and they deserve to be considered the favorite, even though I'm changing it for the time being. Essex, and then I would throw out there Galax. Galax has 2 losses, but keep in mind for Galax, 2 of those losses have come to higher classification schools. They've just played Graham and Radford, 2 of the contenders for the Class 2 title. So Galax, they've played bridesmaid Riverheads the last few years in the state championship round. They're going to be in the mix before it's all said and done, probably coming out of 1C. So those are kind of the 3 that are separated. Beyond that, some compelling games, but when it's all said and done come championship time, I think those could be some lopsided margins, especially given what we just saw Essex do to King and Queen, who's one of the better teams, and we've got, I think, 4th or 5th in the rankings. So,
Matthew, the Riverheads loss, where was that game, and what kind of atmosphere was there? Was there a huge crowd there?
Yeah, it was at, believe it or not, it was at Riverheads this year. Last year, they went to Daleville and beat Lord Botetourt. Very good atmosphere. I think many people expected Riverheads to win that game. I know last year I was surprised when they did beat Lord Botetourt, but this time around, Botetourt was able to get them. And Jakari Nicely, I think, was kind of the difference in that game. In addition to their defense not being as, I should say, lacking as far as numbers and having some assignments and so forth. I think Jamie Harless did a good job of getting his defense up to par, up to snuff after last year, a game that he felt was embarrassing that Riverheads came in there. But 35-21 was a very impressive margin to score like that on Riverheads' defense. And, we talk about culture, and certainly Ray Norcross has been at Riverheads for as long as the school's probably been around, 40-plus years. He's been a decorated assistant, but you lose Coach Robert Casto. Anytime you have any type of change to a staff that's been so cohesive in continuity for those years, there's going to be a little bit of a, maybe not so much drop off, but adjustment period. So I think Riverheads is still going through a little bit of an adjustment period with that, him being the main voice now, as opposed to like the number 2 voice or supplementary voice to what Coach Casto was. I think they'll still be right there. Would be stunned if they don't get to the state playoffs, but Essex right now looks like they have hit a different gear, and they're going to be hard to beat come playoff time. So I've made 2 fan bases very upset today, Julian. I've told Oscar Smith Freedom's going to take them down, and I've told Riverheads that your run's coming to an end by Essex. So they're waiting to put egg on my face.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, Matthew, look, this is great. Recently, I've heard people complaining that there's not a lot of coverage of high school sports by the major news media. I just implore people, go to VirginiaPreps.com. Not only do you got scores and news, you guys do real analysis of the games. They can find you at 94.1 ESPN Radio on Saturdays at 10 o'clock, 10 to 12. Also on YouTube, Matthew Hatfield. You have a lot of interviews there, a lot of great stuff there. You do a lot of great analysis. So people are looking for high school sports, Virginia high school sports. You guys do a tremendous job for many, many years of covering the sports, and we appreciate it.
Thank you, Julian. It was a pleasure, and keep doing what you're doing. It's fantastic to watch all the different interviews and people you have on, and your credit to the community and the high school sports and sports scene in general, just even beyond some of the high school people you get on. So always good to chat with you, and enjoy your rest of your week.
Yeah, let's get together before the playoffs and hear your analysis of the playoffs.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
Great. All right. Thanks, Matt. Have a great day, buddy.